My deep appreciation of theater history was instilled in me by Tom Empey, a college mentor to me and hundreds of others. While teaching Greek theater terms, he would grab the fabric of his slacks and say, "You see these pants? Euripides Eumenides," making light of content that could be considered rather dry and stuffy while still maintaining respect for the art, which is what I want to do with this podcast. For each episode, I invite a guest from the many paths my theater career has taken me down. I give my guest no idea what we'll be talking about, but they know we're going to find an outrageous story about theater history and perhaps get a better understanding about why we're still doing it after all these years. So welcome to Euripides Eumenides, and I am your host, Aaron Odom.
Apocalypse, apocalypse, I said, why you wanna show up now? Just when the whole of my life was getting good. I'll give you one more chance. Walk on out of the door, yeah. Get your ass to getting where the getting is good.
Good morrow, Eumenidites. This is Aaron Odom from Trident Theater, bringing you another episode of Euripides Eumenides, a theater history podcast. If you tuned in to the last episode, you know that I'm now on something of a countdown to deliver 100 regular full-length episodes of this podcast, and more, and here we are at episode 90. I've still got no shortage of topics to bring to my guests and to you, my listeners, but I haven't quite figured out what is going to be my first triple-digit episode just yet. Again, I'd love to hear your feedback on this. Reach out to me on the Instagram pages for Trident Theater or Euripides Eumenides. Trident also has a Facebook page, or you can send an email to trident@tridenttheater.com. You can even use the contact us form at tridenttheater.com. A lot of you have done that so far, and I love seeing what feedback I'm getting. I'm also looking at those of you who lurk in YouTube comments. You know who you are and what you've said, and it's massively entertaining to me. I'm going to be massively cryptic here for a moment, and if you can figure out what I'm responding to with this next message, you win extra points. Ants judging dragons? Sure, you just tell that to Vivian Lee. Okay, enough coded language. Let's get to episode 90. For this episode, I brought back Micah Wyatt, who was a guest on episode 52, The Tall Tales of Calamity Jane. I thought of Micah in particular for this episode as he's taught creative writing, has been published, and knows quite a thing or two about what people enjoy when it comes to the arts. In his day job, he runs the streets of Lander, dispensing justice as a lawman, a lawyer. But in his spare time, he does a lot of stuff with the arts. And I also have quite a bit of a surprise in store for him by the end of the episode. Enough chatting about it, though. We had a great time dissecting this topic for this episode, and without further ado, here is episode 90, Stephen King's Misery on Stage. I don't know if you listened to the last episode or not, but I did have to recount the day that you and I started a protest at some high school in Wyoming about giving power to the pontoon boat driver.
Well, it was an important message for the public,
It sure was.
Aaron.
It sure was.
Yeah.
And, I haven't checked since the last episode, but I still don't think they've gotten their representation.
I don't believe they have.
No.
It's sad, really.
I wonder if they're enough to make a picket line.
Perhaps a picket picnic table, maybe.
Oh, man. But things are going well for you. The law is treating you well.
It is. There's, I could complain about so many things, but that's what I do at work when I'm not doing work. So why would I bring it home?
Absolutely. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
I left the briefcase at the office. Well, Micah, I want to jump right into today because I realize that I probably wrote way more than I should on this, but it is a subject that is very near and dear to me and will become even more so in the coming months. But I don't even have a question for you today. But what I'll tell you is we are going to talk about a popular author adapting one of those authors' works into other media. So you know what I'll do, what I'll say is, given that Go ahead and give me your best ballpark idea of what we might be talking about today.
Anne of Green Gables.
Because that is so me.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I think Batman. Batman?
No, that's a good guess for me, though. That really is a good guess. Actually, my younger son, goes crazy when he gets into a new franchise. Like he just, feels a spark and he's just got to consume literally as much as he possibly can. And the last time he was at my house, I think he watched over the course of a weekend about 12 hours of Batman stuff and read about, I don't know, maybe 10 to 20 books from just one story arc. He's like, can you believe this happened? I'm like, I can believe that happened because I have also been in your position before.
I was there when it came out, son.
I was at Woodstock, damn it. Anyway, okay.
Batman, our generation's Woodstock. All right, onward. My best guess fell flat.
No, it is not Anne of Green Gables or Batman. So here we go. Looking back on his career, author Stephen King recalls looking back at one of the peaks of his fame in the mid-1980s as a time when he was so big that he almost couldn't be held accountable. Now, Micah, you've taught creative writing, you've been published, you've done all this stuff. I mean, so you can understand somebody who has gotten to that height.
Oh, absolutely.
That they can bring in whatever they want to the editor, and the editor's like, well, I don't know. And he replies with, I'm Stephen King, God damn it! Just publish it!
It'll work.
It'll work.
You don't even have to trust me. It will work. A cemetery where they take pets. There are Indians. Trust me.
And this car tries to eat people.
Yes.
So by this time, in the mid-1980s, some of his biggest novels had already been adapted into major motion pictures with tremendous success, like Carrie, Cujo, The Shining, Christine, like I just mentioned. He published it in 1986 to tremendous success. And it was a huge book, like 1,000 pages.
I remember when kids were reading that book, Aaron. It was, that was the book that they used as an excuse for not reading the books they were supposed to be reading. And everybody was cool with it, They're like, it's it. Oh, never mind. That's like 1,000 pages.
Boy, that's taking up a lot of your time reading. Wow. It worked. So, the 1980s, though, weren't a completely free and easy time for King. Despite some early success having film adaptations of his novels go completely viral, he did have some duds attached to his name. Firestarter was the first of a string of King film adaptation duds that King thought would lower his box office power, and it somewhat did. Like, it kind of was a 50-50 thing. People would be like, but it's a Stephen King thing. They're like, let's flip a coin on that one.
Yeah, no, for all of the fire, that one was a dud, I'd say.
Yeah. All of this professional turmoil was no doubt a factor in King's addiction issues. Being an absolute celebrity has often led to this. Quote, reportedly sober for about 3 hours a day, King was guzzling beer and hoovering up cocaine at a staggering rate.
Where did that quote come from?
Just a great article, but obviously
impressive.
a little British. He was hoovering up the cocaine.
Hoovering it up.
Once the buzz from the beer wore off, we gotta crank it back the other direction. Fuck.
Right.
Now, King is often quite private about the details of his recovery, but apparently sometime in this peak of fame, his family staged an intervention, and he has been sober ever since. So that's good. And the addiction and recovery did put him in something of a brief career slump, but he still felt he needed to write. And thus, he came up with the idea for one of his most well-known books and characters. King had gotten the idea in 1984 while on a return flight to America after promoting his novel, The Talisman, in the UK. He fell asleep on the trip, and had a dream about a crazed fan who had kidnapped her favorite author with the intent of keeping him prisoner so he could write books only for her. And when he woke, he scribbled some ideas on a napkin, and at a hotel he was staying at, he sat down at a desk that once belonged to Rudyard Kipling and wrote out by hand 16 pages.
Sure.
Jesus. Okay, what was this about addiction? And thus, King created the first drafts of what would come to be known as one of his most popular novels, Misery. He's clapping. Mike is applauding. Okay.
It's been a short roller coaster ride so far, but I'm sold, my friend.
I'm sold. I am in. I am sitting down in the seat. The little buckle is on. I just need to hear the clickety clicks. Let's go. So I'll pause the narrative here to give a brief overview of the plot without giving too much away, as I'm not really a fan of spoilers. In fact, as I was reading through this, so many were like, we can't really talk about it because I don't want to spoil it. You got to go out and digest the material, which I also believe you need to do. But if you are one of the very few people in this world who haven't read the novel or seen the movie, I'm actually quite surprised. They're both phenomenal, in my opinion. Here's my version of the blurb that would be on the back cover of the book. Author Paul Sheldon, who has become rich and famous for writing a series of romantic adventure novels starring his melodramatic heroine, Misery Chastain, has just finished a novel that he believes will help him become a writer of literature rather than an author of popular fiction. While leaving the hotel in Colorado, where he always goes to finish a novel, he gets caught in a snowstorm in the mountains and has a horrible car accident. He is pulled from the wreckage by Annie Wilkes, a former nurse who lives in a large, isolated country house all by herself. With her medical prowess, she manages to keep Paul alive, even though his legs have been shattered by the crash. While the snowstorm prevents any communications and access to the outside world, Paul soon realizes that Annie is madly obsessed with his Misery novels and is quite insane. As Paul begins to heal, Annie finds more and more ways to keep Paul captive under her power so he can write at least one last Misery novel before, as Paul is convinced, she plans to kill him. So, I don't think I gave any too much away there, right?
No, indeed not. Good setup. Yeah,
yep.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'd go see that if I just heard about that.
100%.
Yeah.
Sitting around, watch some Netflix. You absolutely bet I would watch that blurb.
And it's an actual accurate blurb instead of, I love
instead of most of what you hear.
Oh my God.
Read.
I love those threads where it's just terrible descriptions of things. Here, I'm going to describe a movie. A young woman travels through a strange land, meeting new friends in order to find her way back home.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the Wizard
Dorothy.
of Oz. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
I didn't mention anything about magic or witches or lions or scarecrows or munchkins.
Yeah, no, true. You didn't. Hell, that could be Anne of Green Gables the way we're doing.
No, wait. Is one of the characters she meets Batman? Now, while King initially meant for the story to be a short story, he began to identify with Paul Sheldon more and more, finding ways to make the story longer and longer. And eventually, after working on it for several years, King had a full-length novel that was first published in 1987, and it was an immense success. Here's a quote. With a first printing of 900,000 copies, it was the fourth most popular hardcover book of 1987. And by 1990, it had sold 875,000 copies, making it the 15th most popular book of the decade.
Wow.
What?
Yeah.
I mean, and at that point, you have to imagine that anything you're going to write is doing that. That's just...
yeah, absolutely, man.
That's
right?
so stellar. Right.
And the thing that always gets me about Stephen King is that he's like George Lucas doing George Lucas 5 times better than George Lucas does George Lucas. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm going to get into that here in a little bit. And I think that Misery really allowed him to really understand himself. Like I had in college, I knew a guy who was a real huge fan of the band U2. And this was around 2000 when Beautiful Day, well, that album came out. And he was so conflicted because I guess he was telling us one night at a rehearsal or something, he was telling us that Bono and the Edge had a big argument while they were making that album. Because Bono kept going, no, it sounds too much like U2. And the Edge goes, we fucking are U2.
Case in point. Yeah.
You can't be new. Like, do you think the Stones ever did that? My God, this sounds too much like us. Nope. Cut and print. Another Stones success. Yep. So King had several things to say about this book that helped him in so many ways, personally and professionally. After finishing, but before publishing Misery, King feels that he was facing some burnout and that everything he wrote for the next year felt like, quote, tissue paper. He announced that he would retire from writing, which caused a huge uproar from his fans. And then, when Misery was published, many fans took offense to the idea of a superfan keeping an author hostage, as though King was admonishing them just for being his fans.
Yeah. I made that connection up here, but I was trying to keep quiet about it because I was like, yeah, that can't be what we're going to talk about. But it was. All right.
However, King was somewhat prepared for this response and the unfortunate circumstance that some fans didn't see the metaphor as an admission of addiction for his fandom. It really kind of was. King recognized that through Paul Sheldon's experience, he was addicted himself to the acceptance of his fans. And Annie Wilkes actually helped him realize that he had gotten so big that he couldn't be touched by an editor, but still needed to hold himself accountable to his fans. Like, you know, the editors are just going to be like, hey, my name's Stephen King. I want to write a new book. They're like, yes, please, we'd love it for it. And can we put our name on it? That would be fantastic. Just whatever it is, you know?
Right.
But he's still got the fans out there who are like, this still sounds too U2. Or it's not U2 enough, I guess, you know?
Yeah, right.
One example, Annie forces Paul to begin his new Misery novel in captivity. And she catches him early on as applying some simple cheats in the early pages and has him start over. Like, he's just like, okay, she's going to make me do this one way or the other. I'm just going to write some stupid fluff and she's going to buy it because she's dumb and simple and doesn't understand. And she's not.
At all. Not at all.
No, you didn't follow what you wrote. Right. I think the line in the movie that she says is, misery was buried in the ground, Paul, so you have to start there.
Yeah.
Like, cool.
Yeah.
How do I bring a corpse back to life? And while he's initially offended, Paul realizes that his fans truly understand his work. And when he isn't up to snuff, they'll let him know or they'll leave him.
Truth.
Right?
Absolutely. And what a weird way to come to that realization in writing this novel that was just some spark on an airplane, right?
Right. I had a fever dream after a promotional tour, and now it became one of the greatest things I've ever done.
Yeah.
And King was pretty plain in an interview about the metaphor of addiction. Quote, Misery is a book about cocaine. Annie Wilkes is cocaine. She was my number one fan.
He
can't live without him, man.
He sure can turn a phrase, can't he?
Yeah, I know, right? And there are a lot of references in the novel to the idea that without Annie Wilkes, Paul would probably die, as he relies upon her to feed and bathe him, much less the requirement for medical care. So frankly, in his novel, he couldn't live without her. And in real life, he couldn't at that time live without cocaine.
Right. Truth. And what about this slightly deeper level? This is the nerd coming out instead of
bring it on.
What about this slightly deeper level where not just, because Paul was about to make this potentially career destroying move, right?
Yeah.
He was going to step away from highly successful Misery and become a literary writer. That's what he wanted in his soul. And somehow this drug pulls him back, right?
Right.
Really weird. Really weird.
And he realized it while in captivity, while his legs are shattered and he can't go anywhere. He can't just go, well, fuck you, and walk out the door.
No, he's trapped.
He's absolutely trapped. Mm-hmm.
Right.
I love it.
And does this addiction save his career? Does it change him? Ooh. Does it make him take a different step? Right.
Yeah.
Right. Interesting.
And finally, King says that Annie Wilkes has always been his favorite character that he's written. She is so simple and complex at the same time. And here are some of those early notes on his napkin. She speaks earnestly, but never quite makes eye contact. A big woman and solid all through. She is an absence of hiatus. And this is him editorializing here. He says, oh, wait, no, this is great. This is what he would imagine she would say to Paul if she ever got the opportunity to meet him. I wasn't trying to be funny in a mean way when I named my pig Misery. No, sir, please don't think that. No, I named her in the spirit of fan love, which is the purest love there is. You should be flattered. That reminds me, I saw an episode of Whose Line Is It Anyway? They played the game, scenes from a hat, and the suggestion was the good news and the bad news. And two characters come into the middle, and one of the actors says, well, the test results are in, and there's some good news. They're going to name a disease after you.
Oh, what's the bad news? Come on.
You should be flattered. Okay, but while King hasn't really expressed precisely what her peculiar mental illness is, many still have plausible theories. And I watched the movie with Andrea, the woman who walks beside me, and her daughter, who just earned her bachelor's degree and minored in psychology. And this was her armchair diagnosis of Annie Wilkes: psychotic bipolar disorder. It's very rare, with periods of manic and depressive episodes, emotional outbursts, followed by almost catatonic states. And those afflicted can also experience hallucinations or delusion. Plus, Annie's got some level of age regression.
Okay.
Okay.
I know what most of those words mean, even put together in those sentences. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
That's awesome.
Because she does have those periods of great rage, and then it just seems like her brain turns off and she's just like staring at the wall for a moment. And then it isn't just like she's revisited the planet. She is slowly, the gears start turning again, and then she becomes human again.
Yep.
You're like, whoa, okay. I mean, some of her outbursts of rage in the book are so incredibly violent that you're like, how can anybody like function this way? Well,
right.
There are people out there. So Annie is a complex character who doesn't realize that she is actually keeping someone hostage, believing that he is choosing to stay there. She also believes that she has been spoken to by God to guide Paul away from the temptation of writing, quote, filth, and getting back to blessing the world with misery.
Oh, that's right. Oh, I'd forgotten about this part. Yeah.
How many times I read that we're giving misery back to the world, and that's a good thing. I just love that metaphor, just playing on those words. Anyway. Okay. So obviously, this book was so popular that it got adapted to film. I just mentioned that. I guess that initially King was incredibly reluctant to do so. As I said before, several of the last film adaptations prior to 1987 had flopped pretty hard. And like I said, he was really facing some burnout. But when he was approached by Rob Reiner, who had directed the film adaptation of his short story Stand By Me, King was a little less hesitant. For a very high price, King allowed Reiner to have the rights on the condition that Reiner either produced or directed it. And after being turned down by two directors, Reiner eventually met both of King's conditions. He directed and produced.
Wow.
Hook, line, and sinker.
So it's not just his editor he's got cow-tied, man. It's Rob fucking Reiner.
You got served. You got suckered into making one of the most loved horror films of all time.
Right?
Now, the film Misery went on to become an incredible success at the box office in 1990. But if we're going to talk about it, we have to address Kathy Bates in her amazing performance as Annie Wilkes, a performance that won her the Oscar for Best Actress in 1991.
Yeah, please, let's talk about this.
Okay. Now, up to this point, King's antagonists had often been fantastical or supernatural entities. Kathy Bates describes her character this way. Annie isn't a monster in a horror movie. She's a human being who is a psychopath.
Right.
Completely. Like, I know he's written them before, but, it's not somebody like Carrie who can move things with her mind. It's not a haunted old hotel that is trying to kill the residents,
Right. No. I believe the supernatural is there in this book, but it runs like an undercurrent through the air, right? It's not the primary focus, and it doesn't make things bizarre.
Yeah, okay.
And I believe that ties into what you were talking about, because it is humans with this question mark, right?
Yeah, with a darkness that can't really, like, this is something that I've been thinking about. It is somebody who either lacks the compassion to understand that keeping a person hostage is not okay, or that they do understand that and are doing it anyway. And there's just some sort of darkness to that can't be really explained or explained easily, I guess.
Yeah. And I know we're not spoiling, but that, to me, that was what always got me about the book. I don't think there ever was, right?
No, there was no
explanation.
Yeah. And even I don't go into this too much, but between the film and the novel, there is really not a lot of backstory in the novel as to why Annie is the way she is. But in the movie, they give her a really evil backstory.
Right. Yeah, true.
And not going to spoil it for anybody, but yeah. Now, Rob Reiner knew that he wanted someone to look less like a celebrity and more like someone who could be easily overlooked in a crowd, someone ordinary. Reiner described just what he thought of Kathy's look and performance. Quote, "She has that look of someone who's a fan, that eager, naive look." And the article I pulled that quote from also described her performance this way. It's a little bit longer. Bates uses that innocence to create a character that acts as a composite of modern fandom, both effusive and toxic. We can see our own selves in Annie's excitement over the Misery books, twirling on the balls of her feet, exploding with genuine enthusiasm as she reads the new chapter she's forced the imprisoned author to write. Misery's alive! Misery's alive! Oh, it's so romantic! I'm going to put on my Liberace records. I mean, that's today. Somebody reading, some fanfic online to Billie Eilish.
It absolutely is. And or like bringing up George Lucas again. And I know it's not Lucas anymore, but the entire Star Wars franchise, fans live to trash that.
Yes.
But who's in line when a new movie comes out?
Oh my God. I will never forget it. I was living up in Seattle when episode 3 came out, Revenge of the Sith. What's going to happen?
Yeah.
We all know he becomes Darth Vader by the end. We already know. We know.
Spoiler.
But, it was one of those things you see on TV in a big city when there's lines down the block. And the theater I went to was this huge, huge theater. So we all had this barricaded section, or, barricaded by velvet ropes,
right,
of where my screening was going to go see it. And we're all shoved up against a wall, and we had to be there like an hour early. And 45 minutes into that, the stream of people who are just exiting the theater that we're about to go into passes us. And I can't even tell you how many people would look us all dead earnestly in the eyes, complete strangers, and say to us, "Worst Star Wars ever. Don't go see it."
That's incredible.
I know. But you know that they went to the evening screening right after that.
Of course they did. Yeah. When it gets re-released, they're going to be there.
Yep. And they're going to sit there with their pre-bought tickets, and maybe they bring somebody special with them and look them in the eye and go, "Do you remember the first time we hated this together?" Takes me back. Okay, whatever. Well, Micah, Of course, we wouldn't be talking about this on a theater history podcast if it didn't somehow relate to theater.
Of course, naturally.
So, even Stephen King had this to say in a 1992 interview. I was surprised when Misery was a movie, and I always thought, if anything, it's a play. It's a 2-act, one-set moneymaker. The question is, does anyone really want to see it now that it's been a movie?
Uh-huh.
So, this begins the question that I'd like to discuss with you for just a moment. What would be essential to making a successful adaptation of Misery for the stage? I mean, there we get to pull on your creative writing hat.
I would say, well, here's an interesting thought. The first thing that came to mind was, what stage would it play on?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Location.
What is the appropriate vessel to carry this story to the audience? Because there are so many theaters where it will not work, would not work.
No.
So that, to me, would be the first operative question, which as a writer is a weird one.
Right? Well, at that point, you're just like, I'm the writer. I don't care. You make it work. Right?
Right. Exactly.
I wrote it. If you can't make it work, then that's not my problem. Anyway.
Come on, buddy.
So here's kind of a short list that I came up with. Danger has to be ever present.
Yes.
Because the idea here is that at any moment, she could completely lose her mind and kill him for no other reason than she felt provoked to do so.
Yeah, it's certainly true.
Yeah. I mean, so it would probably be best to live this experience through the story through Paul Sheldon's point of view, right? Instead of trying to balance them. Let's see her more, let's see him more, whatever, right?
I would certainly agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like, one of your primary points of creating writing like this, you want to see the world through the eyes of the protagonist, right? You want to live that story. Yep. I mean, that's the funniest thing when people who I've taught it many times. And when I start to teach Greek tragedy, we watch one. And you have to get past the ideas of here's the structure of it. Like the chorus talks a little bit and then the characters talk to the chorus and, but then it comes to the climax, which in Greek tragedy is always in the middle. It's always, this is the point past which there is no return. And if you decide one way, you're probably going to be fine. But if you decide the other way, which speaks to your tragic flaw, you're going to meet your downfall. And there's that one moment in Oedipus where it's all laid out. Sorry, you did kill your father and marry your mother. Your children are bastards of your own progeny, basically. So I don't know. What do you want to do? And he's like, that's not true. And every time the students are like, oh my God, how did he not see that coming? I'm like, well, you're sitting out here. That's how he did not see that coming.
Right.
It's called dramatic irony.
Right. Yeah, absolutely true. Another thing too, just along those same lines, I think the writer would have to simply accept everyone knows the story. Right? You could not rely on the reveal. You could not rely on the things that probably even the backstory stuff you'd mentioned earlier that got added to the film, right? Yeah. I feel as though that would kill the story on stage. And I also sort of feel like you'd need to get to that danger so quickly. It warms up. In both the book and the movie, it warms up. You catch glimpses of something that might be it going to happen, but that's just Stephen King's like genius suspense building that keeps you turning a book that has 1,000 pages in it. Yeah. But on the stage, to get that tension, you would have to arrive there so quickly. Yeah. And I remember that as I'm reading through the novel again right now. And maybe 10 pages in, third chapter, I think it ends with Paul Sheldon realized two things. He was hopelessly addicted to painkillers and that Annie Wilkes was dangerously crazy. And up to that point, you're like, I don't know if I've gotten the same evidence that you have gotten.
But okay, I guess, yep. Now we've got got the idea, so we're looking for it. And then we do get it relatively quickly.
Right.
And then I think the last point to consider is what does make Annie Wilkes so terrifying? I think those are just things that have to be established.
Yeah, they certainly do.
The danger is there. Let's get to it. And why is she dangerous? Okay.
It's that preeminence, right?
Right. Yeah. So what else would you consider would be necessary in a stage adaptation of Misery? Obviously, the terror would need to be established early on, and we'd need to know that Annie is the source of that terror. But also, how can we define that terror so that it just has a tinge of the inexplicable to it? What else? I'd love to hear your thoughts. But while we're here, I'd sure appreciate it if you'd give the show a rating or review wherever you're listening. It really does help the show out by letting the algorithms do their things and get the show to more interested people like yourselves. Maybe you all can figure out how to meet up and have some Eumenidite listening parties. That would be just superb. But let's get back to Micah Wyatt, my big surprise, and hear about the 2 official adaptations of Stephen King's Misery on stage. So, let's talk about the 2 official adaptations that have been produced. Wheels were set into motion in London in 1992, 2 years after the film was released, when theater artist Simon Moore wrote an adaptation to be produced at the Criterion Theatre on the West End in London. The script is much closer to the novel than it is to the film. Moore did almost exactly what King suggested. It's basically a 2-person, single-room, taut thriller that turns the focus back on the writer is stuck in a situation with a person who is dangerously crazy. Simon Moore preferred this balance a little bit more. And while he did appreciate the film adaptation, he felt it was a little more slanted towards showcasing a crazy person tormenting her victim rather than a story of how to master one's fear in a situation that's almost totally out of his control.
Fair assessment.
Right?
Fair
assessment. But again, that is the adapter. That is somebody taking it from its original form and going, I'm going to tell it this way.
Yeah, true. True, you're right about that. It's not as though he said, I'm going to put the book on stage. He said, right. I'm making this choice about storytelling.
Right. But that is a thing about adaptation is when you're going from one medium to the other, you know, there are things that work in a novel that don't work on stage. Like what's so fun about the novel sometimes is you get to read entire chapters of the book that he's forced to write. So you see like the creativity of this other author coming out and really getting himself out of a pickle and also finding that inspiration to write again.
Right.
Whereas that would be dull as shit on stage.
Oh my word. Absolutely.
Unless you staged what was going on in the novel as though it's happening around him. But that would, to me, that would be so discordant and weird. It's like, oh, okay. Well, now we have these Edwardian figures just roaming around. Neat.
Yeah.
But like we said, getting Annie right is essential. In Moore's original production, Annie was played by Sharon Gless, who is mainly remembered for playing the tough, streetwise cop Christine Cagney in the long-running TV series Cagney and Lacey.
Shut up.
Yeah, we got Cagney.
I used to watch that show with my grandpa. I can't picture it. I'm sorry, I can't.
I know. She's slamming some guy's head into the glass of the interrogation room and well, maybe now I can't picture it. Now, recalling the description of Annie and the way I remember it from the novel, Annie isn't an obese person necessarily, but she has bulk. She's usually described as wearing a simple dress that reaches the floor and a cardigan. So her form really can't be determined, but her size and shape definitely can be. Like she is a force to be reckoned with. Like the way I describe it as a bulk, that's exactly what King was, I think he was trying to imply there. She's just mass.
Right. And you can see that without even any kind of like over elaborate description because of what she was, right? nursing background, those sorts
Yeah.
of things. Like, she was wrestling patients for 30 years, right?
Yeah. Actually, a few times in the novel, Paul is able to move about his room and sometimes passes out from the pain he's experiencing. And then when he wakes up, he's in bed. So he's realizes
back in bed, right?
So she had to have picked him up and been able to maneuver him back into bed all by herself. So
exactly,
it's just got to be assumed she's some being of considerable power. And that's what that's the image that he tried to convey in the book. Now, Sharon Gless was actually kind of surprised by the offer, but it did seem to have a touch of destiny to it. She had been wanting to get a role that didn't require her to have a particular figure. Like the day before she got the offer, she says, I was bitching in my living room about, why can't a woman be heavy or something like that? And then the next day she gets the letter. Takes the offer.
You can be heavy.
Gless has said in interviews that she struggled with weight all of her life. So taking a role in which she didn't have to worry about that would be quite refreshing. Quote, God, I love this. Everyone's impressed when Robert De Niro puts on weight for a role, but when a woman does it, they just go, ugh. I simply eat what I want whenever I want, something I haven't done since I was an adolescent. I'm having the best time. I'm going to bed with buttered popcorn. Gless has later said that the weight gain was one of the bigger regrets of her career, as she put on 40 pounds in about a month, and it actually greatly affected her relationship with her husband, not to mention her health.
Oh, so we're back to addiction here.
Yeah, right? Right. Well, I guess she and her husband were, I think the story I read was when she accepted the role, she said, I'm going to have to be over in London for a month. So when I'm done, you can come see it and everything. And so he hadn't seen her for a month, but she put on 40 pounds. So it just kind of surprised him.
It's a big change.
That is a big change.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Anyway. But the way marriages go, he's surprised. She's like, oh, why are you surprised? And that's the end of that.
Well, I looked it up. They're apparently still married. But audiences seem to love it, often reacting with nervous laughter at some of the more intense moments. And as it usually goes for productions like this, they don't usually extend on the West End unless it's a musical. So it just ran its regular 12-week run. And they said, thank you.
How British.
But a review from a revival on the West End in 2005 praised the actor playing Annie, kind of panned the actor playing Paul, but really praised the script for its ability to create and maintain tension and for adding elements from the book that were not seen in the movie. For example, when Annie spills a bowl of soup during a tirade that she says Paul started, she punishes him by giving him his pain medication and making him slurp them down by drinking from the bucket of dirty mop water she just used to clean up the soup. Not in the movie, but definitely in the book.
Definitely in the book.
And I love, man. Oh, in any case, there are a few records of other revivals of Moore's script, but they seem to stop entirely around the 2010s. Now, while King gave his permission directly to Simon Moore and Company to produce Misery in 1992, Warner Brothers Theater Ventures had it in mind for quite some time to create their own adaptation after having several conversations with Castle Rock Productions, the producers of the film Misery, the executive producer.
Sure.
And Micah, I can't back this up by anything other than my own personal experience. I have a copy of Moore's script right here. And in interest of producing it for Trident Theater, I did my research and called the publishing house listed in the book. They informed me that play could no longer be produced ever again, as another script had now been commissioned and was the only version of the script for which rights could be obtained.
This is a metaphor for Star Wars. What is going on? You chose the exact right topic, my friend. Wow. I'm sorry, that is not canon. This is canon.
Yes. All those other things, they were thoughts that drifted in the wind.
Yeah. Forget about it. They're called the legend. That's the legend. Of Misery.
Except for the ones we like, and we'll say those are acceptable.
Hence adaptation. Yes. Continue.
Yes. It would seem that Warner Brothers Theater Ventures didn't quite have the takeoff that other movie studios did on Broadway in the 2000s. I mean, Disney came in the early 2000s and just swept a whole bunch of things. And I think Fox had some and everything. But Warner Brothers finally struck a little oil when they were able to adapt their very popular Christmas movie, Elf, into a Broadway musical in 2010. And while they've had some limited success with other titles, like most recently, Beetlejuice was a huge thing. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory has done a few things, but they haven't had a lot of like really big names out there. But Misery was always one that Warner Brothers wanted to see on stage, but they wanted it to be done their way. So I guess my assumption there is that they bought out the rights to Moore's play and moved forward with their own plans.
Right, clearly.
I mean, I can't even imagine how much money, like Simon Moore probably never thought, okay, this is going to be my moneymaker for the rest of my life. I just want to be in the room when they said, well, how much would it be for you to never produce this play again?
Oh, I would love to know that number.
I would love to know that number.
That's wild.
So in the early 2010s, Warner Brothers reached out to William Goldman, the legendary screenwriter of movies like All the President's Men, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and The Princess Bride.
Yeah.
And Goldman also wrote the fantastic script for the 1990 film version of Misery.
Huh.
Yeah, right? So they're like, you already know it. Initially, Goldman was a little reluctant as he'd had some bad experiences in the theater, but it would seem that only being the playwright for this version would be quite pleasing. At the time when they first asked him, Goldman was 81. If he only had to write and then send the script on to be produced, it seemed like a pretty good deal.
Yeah, sure. Right.
And plus, he got to work with director William Frears, who had worked off-Broadway quite a bit, but had a reputation for doing works that had, quote, scary themes. and he was absolutely comfortable saying, yep, I do that. I certainly do that.
I could see that being an issue, right? If you take a swing at it in the film world and you knock it out of the park and you go to some place where A, you've got bad history, and B, where scary stuff does not come off the way it does on the screen. Let's face it.
Right.
Yeah, that's a hurdle.
Yeah. So they had 2 workshops in 2011 and eventually had its world premiere at the Bucks County Playhouse in New Hope, Pennsylvania for an 11-performance run starting in December 2012, I think. Now, I couldn't find too much about this performance at Bucks County Playhouse without getting past paywalls. Thank you, Internet.
Of course.
But it would seem that the Bucks County run was enough to convince Warner Brothers to pursue taking Misery to Broadway. Now let's talk about casting, because here it's really a 3-person show. You've got Paul and Annie, and then you've got the sheriff that comes to check up, and he's in it for a total of about 3 minutes. When it came to casting, the Broadway show seemed to be a little bit easier than the film. Goldman had stated just how hard it was to cast Paul Sheldon in the movie. He listed just about every middle-aged actor in the late 80s who had acting chops who all turned it down. I mean, it was extensive. It was like Gene Hackman, Dustin Hoffman, Harrison Ford, Paul Newman.
Oh, sure, right.
Yeah, I don't think Robert Redford was on the list, but I mean, it was extensive. And it finally came to James Caan, and he had said, yeah, I've been out there in the wilderness. I know what it's like. So... But for Broadway, Micah, veteran film actor Bruce Willis had his agents put out feelers to Broadway producers to let them know that he'd be interested in making his Broadway debut. Warner Brothers sent him the script, and he loved it. Case closed. Bruce Willis is Paul Sheldon.
Yeah, okay.
Annie seemed pretty easy too, but Goldman really wrote in an ace in the hole, which seems to be perfect, but also at conflict with everything that Annie is. And I'm going to describe that here. And I'm so interested to see what you think of this. In the first scene of the play, when Paul Sheldon is just regaining consciousness after the car wreck, Goldman writes these stage directions. Annie Wilkes appears in the doorway. She wears, as always, a cardigan sweater. Annie is like no one else on this or any planet. Shocked face.
Yeah. I mean, that's not gonna make it hard. Come on.
I know. I'm like, so what? Does she have a horn, like a unicorn coming out of her? What the hell do you mean? But yeah, but on one hand, like King goes to great lengths to describe just how vile Annie can be sometimes. Like,
Right.
she has body odor. Oh, there's a really colorful line, and I hate to use the word, but at some point between the car wreck and coming to consciousness, Paul recognizes that he did kind of almost regain consciousness sometimes, but that Annie probably didn't understand the medication she was giving him. And he went into like a state of shock that she had to bring him back out with CPR. And the line that he says was something like, the only reason I came back to life was so that I wouldn't have to taste the stink of her breath again. Like, what did he say? Her stinking breath raped me back to life.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
So she's not pleasant
at all.
And besides that, like, she's got a bulk, she's got a frame. So on the other hand, though, that removes the requirement to have a character actor play the part and says, okay, you can have anybody play it, but you've got to justify it.
She has to match that description, right?
Right.
She can be like nothing else on earth. Okay, yeah. Fair.
So I'm like, it was really clever, but it went away from defining her at all.
Yeah, most certainly.
Yeah. So originally, actor Elizabeth Marvel was cast as Annie, and I think I got a picture of her. I'm going to send it to you here.
Procuring sending device.
So here is Elizabeth Marvel. And listeners may remember Elizabeth Marvel from her role as Heather Dunbar in House of Cards, a character who challenged Frank Underwood's march to the U.S. presidency.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
I know her, sure.
But she's not a huge, bulky person.
No. She got that nurse vibe, but yeah.
Yeah. But Marvel also had quite a few Broadway credits to her name, so regular Broadway audiences were a little more assured that it wouldn't just be a show for a Hollywood star to come and pretend he's a Broadway star as well. And I'm not suggesting that's what Bruce Willis was doing. I think he was kind of trying to expand his career.
Right.
So anyway, that having Marvel against Bruce Willis was a nice balance. But as Mike and I kind of were talking about here, looking at this image of Marvel, and you, my listeners, if you're looking her up right now, or if you have an image of her in your mind, you'll notice that she's actually fairly trim and not like any description of Annie that had come before.
Right. And wouldn't wear weight. Like, this is not a person who could gain weight and make it look like she had been this force, her entire life. She has a very slight form as well. Yeah.
Right. Right. And I think she's kind of average height, like 5'6" or something like that. I think I looked that up.
Okay, sure.
Oh, and in fact, in the Bucks County premiere, Annie was played by Joanna Day, who is also more on the slender side and doesn't have the mass that the original description of Annie Wilkes implies. So I don't know. Like, I never could find why they went that way, but I think it was more of a business decision. You have your people who are going to want to go see Misery on Broadway, but you also have your Broadway people that have got to put money into it and invest in it and get people to go see it.
Much more so than film. Yeah, much more so than film. Right.
Yeah. One review I read of it said, like, if you weren't part of the 99.999999% of the world that didn't get to see Misery on Broadway, so it's like you're harnessing it for a very small audience to make a lot of money back.
Yeah.
So
yeah, for sure.
I think it was business. Fair. I think it was business. But unfortunately, Elizabeth Marvel had to drop out due to her commitments to House of Cards. So Warner Brothers was lucky enough to get an extraordinary actor who I think keeps surprising audiences that she's just so good. And I've sent you a picture. Laurie Metcalf.
Roseanne.
Yes, I was just gonna say that's where so many people know her. She's Aunt Jackie.
Aunt Jackie
from Roseanne and the spinoff, The Connors. But she has this incredibly impressive list of Broadway performances. And I think the first one that I saw that didn't actually come to fruition was Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? And I'm like,
okay,
any part you play in that, you have to be on top of your game. And it's a serious, hard acting part. Like, that would be a fantastic play to just do an episode on how to act Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
Definitely.
So audiences getting Laurie Metcalf in there, they're reassured again. Okay, we've got this great person who's going to take this. She's no Kathy Bates, but let's give it a shot. And then, Micah, this set was just extraordinary. I didn't see it, but I've seen video of it. I've heard descriptions of it. The entire set is on a big rotating disc, and it's sectioned off into 4 different quadrants.
Okay.
The bedroom is the one you're in the most. Okay, I'll give spoilers. Paul does figure out how to get out of his locked bedroom a couple times in this story, and as he's rolling around in the house on his wheelchair, the set is basically rolling at the same time with him. So it's almost as though he stays in place on stage and the house moves around him.
Wild.
Yeah. So he goes into like a hallway room and then a kitchen. And then the 4th quadrant is like her front door.
Okay.
So I'm like, that is freaking brilliant. You have just made this thing
that truly is.
That you're cornering into a single room thing into something spectacular that completely breaks things up. You know, if 90% of the thing is in the bedroom, you've just given people some cotton candy.
Right. And without having to have a big set change or anything like that, like there's no, you are still in that space that we kind of talked about when we were first running down this road of how would we adapt this. You're still in that one singular space. I mean, because that was the first snafu that entered my brain. Is it's like it wouldn't work in a big thing because it's too much. You know what I mean? The story has to be the story. You have to go quickly from one thing to the next. Well, there you go. That's genius.
Yeah, isn't that something? So, how did it do in 2015 when it opened? I think it would open at the Broadhurst Theater. I can't remember how many seats that is, but I'll start with the good. First of all, everyone loved the set. And the tech around it. Like, you know, they had good tech.
Okay. All right, fair.
And Laurie Metcalf, phenomenal. Like, she is somebody that just keeps surprising people that she is as good as she is, I think. And then I have to remind people, like, she was probably one of the best Scream killers in the Scream franchise. And nobody saw her coming. Yeah. She was so great. She was so great.
True. Yeah, that's true. I didn't actually think about Scream when she first came into my brain here. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Right. She's so hidden. Like she's so good, and then she pops up and you're like, thank God you're here.
Right. She's unassuming. Isn't that what we were talking about with respect to this character in particular?
Right.
She's like that character you don't see until she's got you kidnapped in her house, right?
Right. But here's a great clipping from one review by Cemetery Dance Publications. It's a publishing house dedicated to horror and dark suspense stories. But this is why I suspect that the production team, not only for business reasons, but they were comfortable casting someone without the original description's bulk. Here's a quote. Laurie Metcalf as Annie Wilkes is a loose cannon. Laurie's Annie is a wild woman right from the start. She is erratic, neurotic, and jumpy with a sadistic and manic depressive twist. At the same time, the performance is genuine, and that is credited to Laurie's acting chops. A stage veteran, having performed in countless shows over the past several decades, she reveals the multi-dimensional nature of Annie, having us feel as much sorrow for her as we do terror.
Yeah.
I'm like, if she can get you to both extremes, who cares if she's not bulky? She's a threat.
100%.
Right?
100%. Right.
So, I don't know. I love that Goldman wrote that's what she can be. She just has to be like no one else on this planet.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And if you think about it from an actor's perspective too, I mean, she is like not that many other actresses, is she?
No.
Honestly.
No, like I can think of like 2 other people who are similar to her, and one of them is Allison Janney, who's like 6'2", and Laurie Metcalf is not 6'2", but fills a particular shape and a very specific shape. And if you get that shape in your show, you are damn lucky to have Laurie Metcalf.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Just some running back through her films. I can't think of one I disliked her in ever.
Right. And I never did see Lady Bird, but I hear she was outstanding in that. Like Well,
Yeah.
Oscar nomination.
Almost say no more right there.
Well, okay, I've talked enough about the good. Let's talk about the not
That
so
was
great.
only two things. The
Yep.
good was only two things.
Yeah.
Okay, proceed.
The New York Times review by my favorite, Ben Brantley, was not as kind. This is a longer quote, but I love this. Never mind that we start off in the darkest, deepest winter in an isolated Gothic farmhouse as thunder cracks and lightning flashes. You're more likely to experience chills sitting in a tepid bath at home. Mr. Willis behaves in much the same way as he does the indestructible Detective McClane while being tortured, shot at, and nearly blown to oblivion in the Die Hard film series for which he is best known. That is, he's a wisecracking, sleepily charming stoic who occasionally flinches or roars when he is subjected to severe pain, but never, ever lets us see that he might be afraid.
Ah, crap.
Are you scared? Yeah. Here's the rest of the quote here. Even when he's strapped to a bed with both his legs broken, while the psychopath, played by Miss Metcalf, hovers over him with a hypodermic needle, we do not doubt that good old John McClane, I mean Paul Sheldon, will prevail.
Yeah.
I mean, just go ahead and take all the wind out of the sails.
Yep.
Now, many other reviews shared similar statements, or similar sentiments, but you just don't get much better than Ben Brantley when shitting on a play. All reviews also mentioned how the stage play couldn't maintain the intensity of the film, and perhaps that's just a problem with the change of medium. But
Sure.
Goldman's script has been revived all over the world many times since 2015, and if listeners happen to be in the Sheridan, Wyoming area in February 2025, you can see if I managed to bring out the terror when I direct it at the Wyo Performing Arts and Education Center.
I'm gonna do it. That's good because two of the theaters I figured that show could work in are in Sheridan. So.
Yeah, right. And Micah, that's my story on Stephen King's Misery on stage.
Man, that's awesome.
Yeah, maybe I did this just as a brainstorming session, and maybe I'll get some feedback from my listeners. I don't know, but here's what I plan to do. I plan to put it in a thrust setting, so surrounded on three sides, and you're in the bedroom. So you're going to feel like you're in there with them. I'm going to have maybe another little set piece that's like the front porch. But then for all the scenes that he goes scooting around the house and everything, I think I'm going to film those and just shoot them up on a projection screen so that you really can experience like the terror, the fear at the same time while giving my actor a chance to go off and maybe take a pee or something like that.
For sure. Right. That would be a pretty long sit, 2 acts.
Yeah. And this Goldman script, one of the ways that Frears, William Frears, the original director, said we keep it taut and intense is it is no longer than 90 minutes and there's no intermission.
Wow. Are you going to do the same?
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a lot to be said for getting up and going to the bathroom in the middle of a really scary play and talking with everybody in the lobby while you get drinks.
True.
So I don't know. But 2 45-minute halves, it just seems like, I don't know. But yeah, it would seem like that's what I got to do. I got to find an actor who can get Annie right. And right at this point no longer means she is freaking Solomon Grundy from the Batman comics. She's not like this unstoppable, indestructible force. She is somebody who is human and fragile, who's psychopathic and terribly dangerous. Yeah.
No, and that's the thing. Goldman gives you the terror of freedom here, my friend.
Yeah, I know. But that being said, much more of the play is Paul Sheldon. So we have to avoid the peril that Bruce Willis fell into with just trying to squint his way through everything and actually give some actual terror and fear. And somebody's got to be able to do that.
Yeah. And from a storytelling perspective, that's pretty great, actually, because in this entire story, you telling me my familiarity with both the book and the movie, I have not seen either stage production, not having been that cool in my life. The one thing I never questioned was Paul Sheldon.
Yeah.
Is he's solid in book and he's solid in the film.
Well, in the film, I think one of the reviews that I read said, like, you saw sweat just pouring off of his face, not just an effort to get back to where he's supposed to be, but also in the terror of, if I don't get there by this certain time, I'm surely dead, or worse.
Yeah.
She might keep me alive and hurt me worse.
Yeah, exactly.
And the fear was legitimate. So if you don't play that well, if you don't figure out what makes Annie scary, then it falls flat.
Yeah, 100%.
That's what I think. So yeah, I'm gonna do this. And actually, I saw the Moore version, and I'm not going to give any spoilers here, but there's a hint in the novel of Annie's backstory that has to do with a house fire. And at some point in the play, in Simon Moore's version, she's standing at the bottom of a staircase and just like blindly staring up a staircase and flicking the light of the staircase on and off in different like rhythms. So it emulates fire. And you're like, ooh, that's weird and creepy and spooky. They take that out of the Goldman version, but they do add some elements to it. And I think that's an interesting thing about adaptation. I have a series of episodes that is all about adapting Shakespeare into more popular formats like film, and how sometimes the stories get completely skewed, and how sometimes people go, oh no, I understand what they were saying. And you watch it and you go, you had no clue what they were saying. And it's just interesting what happens when you go from one medium to the other, just trying to tell something of the same story.
Right.
I guess a lot of people got really, really pissed about Dune Part 2. They're like, well, they left this part out. And I'm like, and that wouldn't work in cinema, period.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't.
Yeah, sorry. And what a fascinating, speaking of adaptation, like what another fascinating sort of addressing of those things. Because, consider this with respect to Dune, Frank Herbert wrote the original, trilogy of those books.
Right.
He wrote a few more, but then he passed away. Like, he passed away fairly early in the whole Dune story. So his kids with other writers picked up the story. I think his wife wrote a couple. I could be wrong about that, but I believe that's true.
Yeah,
and
something like that.
Then we get the weird Lynch film. There's also that really strange miniseries. Do you remember that from the early 2000s? Yeah. Yeah, which had its good parts and bad parts, frankly. And then on to what is happening now. And so, it's always this, it is fascinating how the audience is always looking for something. The adapter does, you don't know what they're looking for. And being able to make that connection, like hooking those things up, like here, like what happened with, I believe, the movie, as well as this first stage adaptation, from what you've told me, is like things just clicked and worked.
Yeah.
And that's great.
Yeah.
I'm sure there were critics that disagreed with some choices and here and there, et cetera, right? However, they worked.
Yeah.
But then you're stuck now with this new adaptation that you have to make work.
and well, the thing is, I look at it and I go, I think it is a really clever synthesis of the book and the film into a stage version of it. You just have to make it work so that you're not stuck in a room for the entire time. And you have to make that room the most terrifying place you've ever been. So easy, right?
Oh, sure.
No problem.
You got this, baby. You got this.
Maybe I don't drop the suspense quite as good as Stephen King, but I think I surprised Micah as to why I thought of this episode as a topic to discuss with him. I've been wanting to direct this story on stage for years, and I am often asked why I'm interested in directing a spooky show on stage. My usual answer is this: as I consider the theater to be a gymnasium for emotion and thought, it cannot be denied that fear and survivalism are emotions and instincts respectively. Where else can we explore those facets of ourselves better than a relatively safe space like the theater? And I want to thank Micah Wyatt for his contributions to this episode, and I'm glad to have him back anytime. But for now, I'll sign off. This has been another episode of Euripides Eumenides, a theater history podcast. Another episode will be in your ears in 2 weeks. See you at intermission.